This is TransAfricaRadio.
6:30 Central African time, and of course I'm joined in the studio by my hashtag Man Talk guest. His name is Joshua Joseph Busha. You know, I'm going to call you Joshua so many times because my very good friend's dad is Joshua, and his son is also the B as well. So my big apologies, but thank you so much for coming into the studio, Joseph.
No, thank you so much.
So welcome into the studio. So even off air, we're having discussions already about the state of politics in our country, and I think you're possibly one of the most appropriate people to have the discussion with, because you are a citizen of two countries. You are Zimbabwean by birth. Of course, you studied and work in South Africa. Do you find that you are always torn about, you know, where your heart lies as far as the politics of the world are concerned?
No, certainly. I think I've been here for about 28 years, so that's a long time.
Yeah.
And certainly I feel part of South Africa and I feel part of SADC. I understand the two countries, I understand the cultures, and I understand the current affairs, what's going on. But, you know, I don't want it to mirror the other. I'm hoping that, you know, at least South Africa will learn from the past and make sure that we become a prosperous nation.
I think you have such wonderful insight, because you get to see two of possibly the most controversial countries on the African continent play out. And for me, it is incredible that there's this, you know, invisible wall. I mean, I know we've got, you know, Beitbridge being our actual border, but we're literally, you know, we've got as many Zimbabweans in South Africa and vice versa, that we truly could be one nation. But the zeitgeist is so different in those two nations, and you find yourself conducting business and politics across the borders. How do you even begin to reconcile sort of the landscape of these two very different countries, but such, you know, we almost have a symbiosis together?
Well, I like your description that, you know, we've got this invisible kind of war that separates Zimbabwe and South Africa. But what's interesting now, I think, having stayed in the two countries almost half, you know, you almost don't know where you belong. So
yeah.
People almost think like, no, you don't know anything about Zimbabwe because you are in South Africa.
Yeah.
And South Africans say, well, no, listen, you really don't know much about South Africa because you were born in Zimbabwe. But I think what it's done for me, it has allowed me to learn as much as possible. First, to learn about ourselves as Africans, and secondly, to say what is it we need to be able to do to make sure that eventually we're economically independent as a nation and as a people. So if you look in terms of the transition of Zimbabwe from colonial rule of Ian Smith to majority rule, if I may say it that way. So the majority rule really just applied the fact that the people who were running the government were black.
Yeah.
But actually, it's still a minority rule, because it's just those people in ZANU-PF who are running the country. So I don't really want to call it majority rule, because they're not really ruling by majority. So come down South Africa in the late 80s. Then again, I come into a country that was going through some transition, from segregation and apartheid into a democratic South Africa that was led first by President Mandela. And you've seen what has happened. So actually every year we choose themes we focus on as a business. So last year we had celebrating the womb, which was celebrating women, and we're just focusing on African women and women in general in terms of what they've achieved. This year our theme is nations in transition, because I believe every nation on earth is almost going through some transition of some form.
I mean, when you say our transition, of course you're talking about JM Busha Investment Group, which also then has the foundation attached to it, which is what we're going to be discussing a bit later on. So every year then the business decides on a theme, and we are in transition.
100%, yeah.
Which is quite interesting, because we sit now with a democracy that's just gotten out of its teens, and it sort of has acne on its skin, and it's partying very hard, and it's trying to find its identity. Yet when we look north, a couple of 100 kilometers, we have a country that has, as you say, not majority rule. But for me, the parallels are almost chilling, because we're sitting now, on Tuesday, we had Minister Lynn Brown in South Africa, who is our Minister of
Public Works,
sitting in the standing committee on public accounts. Short of being lambasted and grilled over the coals, I think one presenter on ENCA said she's been grilled worse than a hot dog, and it did seem that way. And you had on one side people we hold accountable, people who we see as beacons of hope in this democracy of ours in South Africa, and on the other end you've got sort of the corrupted, and by whom they're corrupted is a discussion for another show altogether. And they were sitting sort of opposing each other, and it just quite interesting to watch that our South Africa could possibly be on the road to being a Zimbabwe. But and then when we do say a Zimbabwe, what do we mean? Is it a failed state? What does a failed state even entail?
That's very true. I think Zimbabwe got to the failed state. A failed state is a country that can't feed itself. A failed state is a country that does not have its own currency. A failed state basically is a country that is not economically independent and cannot survive on its own. Now, South Africa certainly, obviously, is far from that. But I think your description is very, very appropriate. That we need to be careful in terms of how we manage the country, how we manage the public purse for the future. Now, if you look in terms of how fast Africa has gone, this is like 24 years down our democracy. So the issues in Zimbabwe started happening exactly just after 20 years of a democracy. So things just started going south the other way. But that's where you need reason, and that's where I'm saying now we need to move our way in terms of leaving our future into the hands of the political and the business class, in terms of just their whims, and take charge. So we're calling citizens that it's your responsibility, me and you, every African, the 1 billion African, to make sure that we do the right thing for the survival of Africa.
Maybe let's take 2 steps back. So we have JM Busha Investments, which is you're the managing director, and you hold 4.5 billion rand.
Yes.
In assets for various clients across the classes, and you invest them on the JSE and other instruments to sort of ensure that they have a pension one day.
I'm with you.
Yeah. And on the other hand, you have then what I'll call the foundation, if you allow me to, which is which encompasses the JM Busha 54 races for peace and unity in Africa, which then is sort of, I don't want to be as crude as say as a CSI wing, because CSI is kind of put money in the corner and hope no one really looks that way. But can you maybe let's just differentiate from those, so that when you talk about we, what is this we were talking about?
Excellent. Thank you so much for that. So JM Busha really is a social enterprise which has got 4 pillars to it. It's got investment management or asset management. That's why we've got the 4.5 billion we manage in terms of third-party funds. Then we've got life insurance.
Okay.
So we've got about 25,000 people on our books. We have investment banking, where we advise corporates and small businesses in terms of capital raising, structuring, project finance, and other investment banking related activities. Then the 4th aspect of it, is the social investment programs. And now, when you talk about CSI, for us, it's not a feel-good factor. Like you say, you pack it there to say, I want people to believe that we're doing something for society.
Yeah.
For us, that's our business. That's why we are called a social enterprise.
Okay.
So that is an integral part of what we do. Because remember, when you start a business or anything, you have to have an objective. So our objectives was to try and create a good society, was to try and say, what is it we can do that is different? So if we then take all those 4 pillars within the asset management, our intention is really to make sure that there's financial inclusion, and we create wealth for all people. And if you look in terms of our vision as a business, our vision, we say we want to see and have a healthy, educated, equitable society that is financially secure, and where individuals can make independent life choices, and we want to be the architect of that. Now, how do we as a business then contribute to make sure that there's a healthy society, there's an educated society, there's an equitable society, and there's total financial inclusion?
Yeah.
And that's why we have the JM Busha 54 races for peace and unity in Africa.
Okay, well, we'll discuss in depthly about the 54 races for peace in Africa, because I think there's a lot to be discussed, especially because we're looking at the number first and foremost. Why 54, which in my very crude assessment was the 54 nations of Africa.
Yes.
But I think that deserves for us to sort of dissect it very well. So I think we'll do that in the next segment. But going back 2 steps, and you'll forgive me for being indelicate, but we look at business on a daily basis. We have the largest corporations on the JSE. The top 40 index is littered with them, who give 100 million rand, sometimes even up to $100 million dollars in aid, in fund, in relief. But yet we seem to still be missing So that real change. And so, when we say you're there and the core of your business is sort of a social enterprise, how do we differentiate that from any other listed fund on the JSE or anywhere else in the world for that matter?
Well, most of the companies are doing it for a good factor.
Yeah.
I believe in South Africa, we're the best company that is really concerned about the well-being of the country, and also that runs the business, obviously on pure corporate governance, but with the understanding what is the national goals. We have to say, what is our role in the NDP? How do we contribute to an educated society? And hence, we take about 3 students to university. We have events like here, the Legend with JM Busha, that really just trying to promote education and social cohesion. We fund also Doctors Without Borders, which is our contribution to health aspect of it. Now, the difference here is that you need to be able to look at the percentage. You've got companies that have been in existence for 150 years, okay? And we've got students who do not have fees at WITS. Right? We've got students who do not have fees at UJ and all the different schools in South Africa. We have children who are studying under trees, and children who are 50 Ks, children who fell into toilets because there's no proper ablution. Okay? And these companies basically have got billions and billions. Now, if they take 100 million rand, what is the percentage of that? We've got the thing that's coming now, the CEO sleep out, which I think is a nonsensical sense of social responsibility.
I want us to fight about that a bit more, because a particular radio station in South Africa has this wonderful initiative they took from, I think it's a European system. So it's a European system where CEOs of sort of the CEO, you can nominate a CEO, whatever, they pay a nominal amount. I think last year was 100,000 rand, and for a lovely day they go and sleep on the lovely streets of Catherine Street. Oh, sorry, it's Maud Street, Maud and Gwen, in the center of Africa's richest square mile, which is being Sandton City, with the lavish portaloos and lovely lights and cameras being flashed everywhere. Now, is this not just the glorification of poverty? Is this not the pornography of poverty, where you get people who are sitting in lovely air-conditioned offices? I can give you an example. I used to work for a company which is one of the top 5 banks. The CEO of the bank has a complete police detail. So he, from point A to point B, has a complete motorcade to rival most presidents, really. And I don't think he ever even will feel the cold, because he'll probably have, insulated corners of the world. And for 100,000 rand, you put it into some fund and it walks away.
That's why I say that's the most nonsensical sense of social responsibility to have been copied by African businesses to copy what's being done overseas. This started with Tokyo Sekwale, our former minister, when he went to sleep in Diepsloot and said, now I feel how cold it is. There are people who basically do not need to feel. For him, it was an expedition, so he can go and talk about it, obviously, at dinners. The same with these CEOs. How much do they earn? So some of them earn about 50 million per year. Now, who is basically giving that money away? It's not even them. If they could contribute at least 1 million of their salaries, or at least 50% of that, then we know they are concerned. Now, what they do to make the poor believe that they are with them is that they go and sleep in nice, what do you call these new thermal blankets, and in nice sleeping whatever couches. Then they'll be calling their wives to say, "No, what, honey, when I get there, I want a hot bath and I want my chocolate. I want my." So really, it's nothing. The guys who are on the street, they have to get food from the bin. They're sleeping right out there. They don't know where they're gonna bath. So I would want to challenge these guys to say, do it for a month, eat the food that is they are eating right there. So rather than for them to try and make us believe that the existence of the poor it depends on their benevolence. So this is really what I'd say I'm against, and this is really where I believe there's this continuation of the gap between the rich and the poor, where the rich believe that the poor live on their generosity.
I mean, with those issues being highlighted, and I'm also quite cognizant that you are politicians, so the lovely things have been said about politicians about as being as trustworthy as us lawyers, but that's a different story for a different day. And I agree with you completely. I think it is the glorification of poverty, and poverty is amazing to behold if it's temporary, a day and a half, and you get back to your comfortable world. My issue here is that, some of the funds that you raise, and you've raised quite a lot of money for the AU peacekeeping missions and the mediation efforts, and you were talking about, Doctors Without Borders as some of your beneficiaries. Let's go back 2 steps. Let's talk about who is meant to hold those businessmen who are sleeping on Gwen Lane in the middle of July as an expedition? Who is meant to hold them to account to say, please don't? Our constitution in South Africa is founded on three simple premise, being dignity, equality, and fairness. And this is a smack in the dignity of the people of the country, because for a day you kind of close the road off, and we hope that no one sees you and you can have wonderful PR, because also the money they make from the PR around that is ludicrous. It is completely ludicrous. There was actually a pissing competition between some CEOs on how much they could donate so that they could companies that look great. I can tell you this for free. In South Africa, for a 30-second ad spent during Generations on SABC1, you'll be paying anything upwards of 380,000 rand for one 30-second advertisement. So this is not a big thing. It is not real money to them. So, but who then has to hold them account? Because I will put it to you that our government is so diabolical and so deeply rooted in the capture of the state, the monopoly, the white capital monopoly, whatever you want to call it, that they themselves are actually complicit in the mess.
Well, there is collusion between the political class and the business class. And that's the problem. Once there is collusion between the business and the political class, there's always tragedy. And that's why there's been tragedy in Africa. Okay, you can start from Ghana. Ghana has been independent since 1957, but Africans are getting poorer and poorer. And we can talk about that, the GDP is increasing, but what is GDP? It's a relative issue, and who feels that? Now, take Santon versus Alex. This is about 3 kilometers apart, and look at the disparity between those two. My view is that this has nothing to do with government or business. It has to do with the citizenry, okay? Because we know, me and you, that both the business class and the political class have failed the majority.
Yeah. I think we're sitting in a sort of a vicious cycle, because it is the old dichotomy of those who have now ascended to the thrones of power, looking back saying, if I could do it, you should do the same, but not realizing that the trajectory and so the scale is so different, because we didn't start off at the same places. Yep. And we're now sitting with people with entitlement saying to you that, it is the big issue of cadre deployment in this country, where we're entitled to positions of power because I went through a cold winter in 19 whatever, and I fought for this country, and now the functionality of the state has moved. Do you think it's time for us to then remove all these historic stalwarts and members of the political class, and start putting people who know what it's like to be on the ground post the apartheid and colonial era, and start working on a daily basis to make sure that we have a real change? Because, I mean, yes, you are the president of the country, and yes, you have a motorcade of 7, 12, 30 cars, but at the end of the day, you have now gone past what it is to be poor, and at the time when you had no choice but to be an activist or perish, really, in either way, and now you're sitting, gathering the riches for yourself because you feel entitled.
No, certainly. I think you told me earlier when we were off air that you did economics.
Yes,
right? Okay.
I failed dismally. Please don't hold me to it.
One of the key issues there's a theory by Mogelin and Miller, M&L Miller, on dividends, that it's irrelevant, right, whether the company pays dividends or not. It's about the total growth of the company.
Yes.
Okay? So it's irrelevant, right, okay, in terms of what role these guys could have played if they do not commit to what we fought for.
Yeah.
Okay? So there's one thing that brought us together was to defeat apartheid, imperialism, right? Now, if we had, during those days, people would say, well, listen, I'm not going to fight because Magnus Malan is sitting in a mansion, so I can't. Nothing will ever been achieved. So our view is that the struggle is not complete, okay? So we have territorial independence, but we do not have economic independence. Now, total freedom basically includes all the liberties, civil liberties, include economic freedom, includes territorial freedom, and the right to the basic needs of our people. That becomes total freedom, because the young people in Africa and in South Africa cannot be innovative and compete as long as they're thinking about where they get their next meal. Okay, so we are not talking about us having an equal playing field. So it's unfortunate that those who have been trusted to be in power, okay, they are having this sense of entitlement that, in the 70s we were in the trenches. But remember, this was a personal commitment and this was a personal choice, and there has to be conscience and guiding principles, and the guiding principle is that we're fighting for equality for all. We know that we'll never be 100% equal, but we need equal opportunities. We do not want to say, when you become a minister officer, then your son becomes a billionaire.
Yes.
That becomes unfortunate.
Are we sitting in a place where we're having a bit of a vicious cycle of a Pandora's box? Because as you were speaking, my immediate vision came to the point that we, in my honest belief, and I might just be killed for saying this, we have a Robert Mugabe and we have a Jacob Zuma who can actually be called Robert Mugabe light, because we're sitting now on the precipice of possibly one of the biggest economic collapses ever seen in this country, whether in the apartheid era or beyond, because we've got someone who is systematically selling off the assets of this country, or key assets of this country that are there for the building of the nation, the rents that are required for us to build infrastructure, to aid in education, etc., and being funneled into a small elite. In the very same way that dare you speak out in, against the ZANU PF of Robert Mugabe in Zimbabwe, you're going to find yourself, either detained indefinitely or worse. Where do we stop and say, but this cannot be happening again? Because I refuse to believe, Joseph, that we are sitting with a president who does not see where this could possibly end. He is very astute. He's a very street smart. He was part of the intelligence with the MK, so he does have the street smarts to behold and comprehend. If he doesn't, then he does not fit the office of president.
Well, certainly, I think he knows what's happening and he knows what's going into the country. But I think what we need to do in the case of South Africa, not necessarily, live from the collective, because he does not act alone. That's number one.
Yeah.
But also, we need to make sure that the established businesses, white capital, if I may put it that way, okay, their hand into all this. Okay, so it's not a one-dimensional issue, right? Okay, you saw when people were marching for the removal of President Zuma, who was marching? Okay, but you see, when we go to June 16 to celebrate what happened in 1976, who goes there?
Exactly.
Okay? So we need to be able to be very careful in terms of how we look into these things to say, how is it happening? Before 1994, nobody talked about human rights. Okay, in this country, nobody talked about the constitution in this country, but you've got some people really who have made it their job to remind us that there is, the constitution, and we are all equal. Yet in some days, African life was considered to be very cheap.
Yeah.
So that balance, I think we're still trying to find it. The tragedy is that the leaders themselves are not leading by example. And this is where I'm going to give you a quote by Chinua Achebe, a Nigerian writer. Okay? And he was referring to Nigeria when he said the problem with Nigeria, and I'm going to replace Nigeria with Africa, okay, is basically the inability of our leaders to take responsibility, and their inability to rise to that responsibility and be an example, good example, which are the hallmarks of true leadership.
Sure.
That's where the issue is.
I think we're sitting in sort of the most important time in the African continent, because I think there's so many external factors and internal factors that are fighting against each other that it is very difficult for us to even see beyond our noses. I think, to be quite frank with you, things like the African Union for me is laughable at best.
Yeah, that's a non-existent thing.
It is just a wonderful place where, again, we funnel money into these institutions, and I think the biggest issue for us is that we paid so much money to put up these institutions that mimic institutions elsewhere, because African Union is just the European Union.
That's what they're mimicking.
In Africa, and we have these wonderful people who have these wonderful names, and we sit here, and for me, it's even sadder to watch someone like Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, sitting now in the fray of the succession battle in the ANC, when, in my opinion, she's done absolutely nothing to advance the women. Did you know there is a minister in the presidency for women? No. I'll tell you why. Because throughout the debacle happening in South Africa, and it's not new, it is not new, it has been ongoing, it's just that the press and the media have finally shown light on this particular issue of the systematic abuse, kidnapping, rape, killing of our women, and she only spoke 2.5 weeks later. 2.5 weeks later, she sits next to the seat of power in the presidency, and it took her 2.5 weeks later. And when she goes out there, she says, she was misquoted, she says that Karabo Mukwena, who was killed by her boyfriend allegedly, I must say, and burnt her body burnt, that she was vulnerable and weak, and that's why she has succumbed to violence. And later on, then she cleared it up because apparently ENCA got it wrong. So whether or not it's there, I just find that it is so glaring that there's such different agendas happening at the top in the seats of power, whether it be union buildings, whether it be Addis Ababa, wherever it is, that it is sometimes a little difficult for us to comprehend. And it's quite exciting that you have taken upon in your business structures to make that the focus of your business, to look after our people. So when we come back on the other side of the musical break, we'll continue having a conversation with Joseph Busha. He comes through as my #Mantalk guest. He's the founder of JM Busha Investments, and of course, we're talking about those 4 pillars of the business and what we can do to make this continent a better place. Don't forget, on the other side of 7:30 Central African Time, it is your top 10 to 8, the top 10 of everything you need to know this side of the equator. Still hanging out with my #Mantalk guest. His name is Joseph Busha, and of course the managing director of Joseph Busha Investments, and he also a leg of the company then is the social development, the social investment wing of it, and it all culminates in this 2-pronged approach between the scholarship and the 54 races.
Well, 54 represent the 54 countries in Africa. So when we looked at it, we said, as our generation, what role are we going to play to shape Africa? So if you look at the generation of Mandela, Kwame Nkrumah, Julius Nyerere, Kaunda, Mugabe and Samora and all those people, right? They can claim that they fought colonialism and defeated it. Okay. But I think in that whole fighting of colonialism was for basically, to make sure that we share in the wealth of the country, which is not necessarily happening. So I thought, what can our generation do? And our generation, I think, needs to be able to create peace, because without peace, there's no social development. Without peace, there is no economic development. Without peace, there's no unity. So on 25 May 1963, the Organization of African Unity was formed, primarily to foster unity among African nations so that there can be better trade within those countries. But unfortunately, as we were saying earlier on, the AU now, which is obviously the Organization of African Unity, is purely just a useless, I think for me right now, organization that hasn't really delivered on its mandate. Okay, when we talk about unity, in 2011, we're splitting Sudan into South Sudan and Sudan. And we're talking about integration, yet we're actually splitting countries rather than to come together. So the JM Busha 54 Races for Peace and Unity in Africa is an initiative, which is an NPO, whose sole objective is based on 3 deliverables: to promote peace through education, arts, culture, music, and sports. And the second one is to engage and enroll individuals, including governments and businesses, to sign as signatories that they will basically make sure that they promote peace. And the third aspect of our objective is to raise funds for the AU for peacing missions, conflict resolution, crisis management, and so on. Because you saw last year that the AU is largely funded by the EU and France in particular. And whenever there's a problem in Africa in particular, there's disturbances, we always rely on the Western world to fund what we do. So they put a new model last year where they say the contribution must be 0.1% of the trade surplus. Each country must contribute. But you saw that Zimbabwe is in a trade deficit. So is Ghana, so is every country. So South Africa now and again, they've got a positive trade deficit. So which means the funding model really penalizes obviously a country like South Africa that does produce trade surplus. So we thought as citizens, let's engage to raise money for those issues, and that's the objectives of that. Now we then say, what are the tools we can use to be able to engage the citizen of Africa to do that? So that's why we have the National Peace Marathon. So we had one in Zimbabwe on the 25th. We'll be having one tomorrow at Randfontein Stadium here in
28th of May.
Of May.
Yeah, Randfontein. It is at the City of Johannesburg Central Gauteng Athletics and Channel Africa.
Those are our partners in terms of being able to deliver that. So next year we want then on Africa Day 25 May to make sure that each country runs a peace marathon. So we're going to roll out to all the 54 countries in 2018. And I'm certainly going to work very hard, I'm sure, with your assistance to make sure that that does happen.
Yes.
Then we'll have ambassadors. So we've got ambassadors who come through the peace marathons, but also student ambassadors. Now, on the student ambassadors, which is really now educational, which is really part of what we're trying to do. So we're saying to young people, students in particular, hold a book and a pen, read, write, okay? And you learn to be free so that you'll be able to dream, to work, and to prosper. Now, we're saying to the young people, whether at high school or at university, find a solution, propose a solution to the main problem in your country. You stand a chance to win 2 books, again promoting education, $1,000 in cash, and $5,000 for your university.
Tuition.
Yeah, for
so
university.
5,000 American
Dollars,
in tuition fees and $1,000 in prize money.
Yes.
Okay, that's
So
amazing.
that at least you can go out to a movie.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, maybe get some popcorn if you like it. Consider what the rand is doing right now, you probably would need it. Let's talk about sort of the avenue of athletics, and I mean, education is trite. You know, it is what it is. But
Yep.
I'm quite interested in because some would say that there's a barrier to entry already, because you know I've often said that I only run for transport.
Yep.
You know, from A to B, and here we're sitting with quite a stringent requirement for you to get into the races, because you also need to do 54 races, 52 races,
Yep.
54 races, and with particular numbers in each. So you need to do particular half marathons, 5 kilometers, etc. Why the use of athletics? And might I add, the prize money looks quite delightful.
Yep. Okay. So for the national marathons, like tomorrow, is 50,000 rand.
Okay.
Now, so the one you're talking about is now the fellows. That includes all the 54 countries.
Yes.
So we're saying now, if you finish in the top 3, right? Okay. In your country, say in Kenya, you must have run 54 races prior to 25 May and dedicate each race to each one African country.
Okay.
So in other words, if you run 10 Ks, you dedicate it to the smallest country, which is Lesotho.
Okay.
You run another 21, you do. And so if you look at athletes, right, they run almost every weekend.
Yeah.
Okay. So they've got 52 weeks in a year. So certainly it's possible. So in
The
other
calendar
words,
is quite full.
yeah, no, so certainly. Then it's possible, because then you use that for training as well. But here's an interesting statistic. Okay. At the last Olympics, there were 974 medals at stake. Okay. Africa only got 45 of the 974. Can you believe it?
Close to 1,000.
Less than 5%.
Yeah.
Okay. South Africa got 10, Kenya 13, Ethiopia 8. So literally you've got only 3 countries possibly that got half of the medals won by Africa. So my view is that if we can then promote young people to get engaged in sports, okay, activities, then they'll run away from drugs, then they'll run away from ISIS, then they won't be lured by Boko Haram. Because if you win 25,000, 50,000 rand tomorrow, certainly you can do something with it, right?
Exactly.
You can contribute towards your education, but also it's healthy, and then we also making sure that we help train people. Look at Vanike Wade, right?
Wade.
He just won 400 meters at the Olympics. What has happened to his life? It's totally transformed.
He has an Audi as well.
I like that.
He drives very
Which
well.
one?
Audi, I think he has the Audi A3, but I stand to be corrected.
A3. Now, what he can do now, he is now financially free. He does obviously advance and promos. Look at Usain Bolt. Usain Bolt is known for running 100 meters in less than 10 seconds, and for that, he gets endorsements.
Yeah.
So we're saying to the young people, if you can't really become a lawyer, okay, you can be a sports person,
Yeah.
you can be a musician, you can do traditional dance. So through all those things, we are able to appreciate each other better.
I think it's also playing to our strengths.
Yep.
I think in any single category of the Olympics, our biggest contribution is in athletics.
Look at Kenya. You're not
Exactly.
going to beat them at 10,000, 42
Don't even
kilometers.
try.
Go to Boston everywhere. The first 3-5 runners are either Kenyans or Ethiopians. So they dominate. And we're saying here in Southern Africa, what is it we can do?
And also, it requires very little, as far as equipment.
Agree with
All
you.
you need to do is put one foot in front of the other, and it does
I agree
also
with you.
promote a healthier
But
nation.
it's possible that it actually can set you free from poverty.
I think what the question that we need to get our heads around, and I think that's where the political will is required, is that these conversations cannot be happening in isolation with the people who are already in the industry, who want to change, who are coming in, who are putting their monies, their dollars and their rands where they need to be. But it's those people who sit in the seats of power across the nations. My question then to you is, how has this been received in those territories? I mean, with those 54 countries who have, some problems that are, span decades, if not close to centuries, for them to get onto an initiative like this?
No, certainly I think there's a lot of buy-in into that. I mean, you have seen countries even like Libya used to have the national team soccer. So sports brings people together.
Yeah.
I mean, we remember 95 with the Rugby Cup here in South Africa and all the sporting codes, how they bring people together.
Yeah.
The good thing about athletics and running, it allows for much participation. So you're not just getting like tennis, one person. So there is mass participation.
Exactly.
Comrades, how many people enter Comrades? 20,000. Soweto, 2 Oceans. So it does allow everybody to take part. But for me, the major issue really is for each individual to take responsibility and say peace precedes love and everything.
What do we do next? What is the thing that we as individuals on the continent need to start doing, and especially those who've got the money to back it up?
We need to sign the pledge. Once we sign the pledge, which you can read for the listeners to hear. Okay.
So the pledge can be found at www.jmbusha. So that's JMBUSHA 54 the number.com/pledge. And my URL has just gone crazy, so I'll read it a little bit later. But for you to sign the pledge, you just go to that URL.
But the peace pledge, if I can just tell you the last part of it, it says, I will not make or support any decision that will cause instability, social unrest, poverty in the country. So imagine you take that peace pledge and take it to your president and say, Mr. President, okay, do you pledge that you will not make or support any decision that will cause problems in the country? Okay? That's what we want. We want businesses, whether you're Chinese business, there's been lots of allegations that Chinese business come and exploit labor in Africa. They come and exploit our resources. Sure. So we also want them to sign that peace pledge that I will not exploit labor, I will not exploit the natural resources of Africa for selfish gains.
I think we are sitting at the precipice of some very great things happening, great in good and great in bad, and history will remember the participants of this part of our democracy as being integral to the next 25 years, I think. And for those who have the wherewithal to stand up and make a change, I think the history will look at them very favorably. And I think you have done amazing work in putting the agenda of Africa to Africa. I say very much on this show, and I say it quite often, that for me the conversation needs to happen at the kitchen table. It has to happen downward up, because clearly people at the top are not listening to us, so let's do it from the bottom up. And I'm very glad you came into the studio. I'm so excited to see what this happens. I'm willing to go in and run a marathon. However, I will start very, very small. I don't think I have the lungs for that right now.
I think the best one thing you can do, the first step, is just sign the peace pledge.
Yeah.
Your name will be basically on our website. Yeah. So once you sign as a signatory, your name will be listed on our website.
And then you'll be able to get any communication that happens in that.
100%.
So so we just go over then to JM Busha 54 and .com, and then go sign the pledge over there. What else are we looking forward to? What is next on the calendar apart from tomorrow? What can we look forward to?
So the next on the calendar is that we want to bring all the 54 heads of states at some stage, hopefully this year, to make sure that they basically commit to this and have the official launch where they get a buy-in as heads of states. So what we can do then is, if they do not really kind of abide by this pledge, we can say to them, so you're actually a liar. Yeah.
Well, I mean, we've had a little issue trying to get Omar al-Bashir to stay put in South Africa, so you might need a bit of help from other institutions.
From you.
Me, I'll talk to Mr. al-Bashir. We are on a WhatsApp group together. So, Mr. al-Bashir, I'll be coming through. But I mean, I think it's the conversation is real. It needs to happen. But the point is this, Joseph, that we're sitting with massive reserves on the JSE alone. We've got 3% of individuals, not companies, individuals in this country having the joint net worth of 62% of the country. 62% of the country. If you think we've got just over 55 million people in this country, the number is ludicrous.
Yep.
And if our leaders are too blind, landing planes at exclusive bases and, going to Shabin's down the road from where we are, then we need to do it ourselves. And I think you are one of the very few who have put their money where their mouths are and put their business where their mouths are and made sure that this becomes a reality for us. And I look forward to seeing what happens. Of course, TransAfrica Radio is a partner where friends will send the word out all the way through Africa, part Asia and part Europe, and we're always here to help.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
And this conversation, of course, is alive and available on the podcast on Tuesday. And also you get to see the lovely Joshua Busha in Joseph, not Joshua.
I think you read the Bible.
I do.
Joshua is in the Bible.
I anticipate the time when I'll be speaking to my president and I want to enlighten him with the words from the Holy Book, because at this rate I think that's all that will help us. But thank you so much, Joseph, for coming through into the studio, which also is from the Bible. So a biblical man, but he's also been called soft-spoken. And if you go over to our website, you'll check out how handsome he is as well. I'll be the short guy next to him in the photograph, but it is #ManTalk.
This is TransAfrica Radio.